Everyone.
Good morning.
Is anybody out there? How is everybody today?
Awake and ready.
Yay. Well, it's our joy to be here. We see some new faces. Welcome. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Nayaswami Gangamata. This is my husband, Nayaswami Daiva, and it's our joy to be here with all of you. I'm going to begin with a reading from Yogananda's book of prayer demands and poems. It's called Whispers from Eternity. He said, if you want to know me, read my whispers. So we'll read one this morning to begin with. And this one is number 139. Thy gentle voice saying, come home, I often heard, but through many lives it was drowned in the tumult of my wild cravings. I have forsaken the jostling crowds of desire. In the solitude of my mind, my devotion bursts to hear thy voice. Take away every dream memory of earthly sounds that yet lurks in my mind. I want to hear thy still voice ever singing in the silence of my soul. Our soul calls to us, as this reading is referring to this morning. It calls to us, return to the stillness, return to stillness where you belong. Hey, dudette, dude, wake up. But instead what happens? We ignore that call and we're drawn out by what? The noise and excitement of the world. And then we put that call down so that we can fulfill more immediate needs. Maybe finding that perfect job or that comfortable home or that loving life companion or that secure bank account. Speaking of security, which is our quality for today, a young naval student was being questioned by his sea captain. And the sea captain says, what would you do if a sudden storm sprang up on the starboard? And the young man says, well, I would throw out an anchor, sir. And the sea captain says, well, what would happen if another storm sprang up aft? And the young student said, well, I would throw out another anchor, sir. And then the sea captain says, well, what if another storm sprang up forward? And the young naval student said, well, I would throw out another anchor, sir. And the sea captain says, whoa, wait a minute. Where are you getting all these anchors from? And the young naval student said, well, the same place you're getting your storms from. And so, even coming onto the path, right, we can ignore that call to stillness. And that's what our reading this morning that Jim read so beautifully is reminding us of. Even coming onto the path, we don't want to get constricted by the rules or the rigidity that can be found there. It doesn't mean that we don't follow the practices. We talked about this in our class yesterday. We started our flagship course, The Art and Science of Raja Yoga. We learned the science, the techniques, how to do these practices. How do we meditate? How do we energize? How do we do yoga postures? I saw on Facebook a couple of days ago a quote that said, thanks to yoga, now I gently stretch to conclusions instead of jumping to them. But again, we're reminded we don't want to stop there. And again, we don't want to not do them. Yogananda, we're so blessed with these teachings because he brought us those tools. He brought us those techniques of meditation, of concentration, so that we can experience that stillness and take it a step further. Because when we get to that stillness, that's where we can have that experience of what? Of that love, that perfected love. That's where we truly find that security. Out in the world, everything's going to change. Those storms are going to keep coming up. And if we're lucky, like that young man, we'll have anchors. But we may not always have anchors. And we'll get tossed and turned. And sometimes, as we all know, these storms are bigger than others. But if we remember that, if we remember to keep our connection in the stillness, in the silence, we can feel for that perfected love that's there all the time with us. There's a beautiful story in the autobiography of a yogi. It's told by Leo Tolstoy. And it's the story of three hermits. And they were really simple, humble hermits. And there they are living on this very remote island. And they said just a very, very simple prayer. We are three, thou art three, have mercy on us. And they just said this over and over. And then the bishop, I guess, got wind or heard somehow that they're saying this prayer. And he said, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't right. There's not much dignity in this prayer. I'm going to go and teach them how to pray. And so he goes over there to teach them how to pray, and they're very receptive. They're very open to learning, and so he teaches them the prayer, and they learn, and they're really happy, and then the bishop is pleased, so he starts to sail away from the island. And then all of a sudden he looks back, and he sees this huge light, and then he can see that it's the three hermits holding hands, and they're floating towards him in this boat. And then the hermits are like, wait, Bishop, don't leave. We actually forgot the prayer. Can you tell us again what the prayer is? But all he could see, the bishop just see, is this huge light. And he says, my children, you don't need the prayer. You're experiencing what the prayer is hoping to get us to. Again, not about the outward form. We don't want to stop there. Many of you know, I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic grammar school and high school. And there's I have happy memories from my time. But there are lots of rituals that you learn, lots of big milestones you go through, First Communion, First Confession, probably over and over, but Confirmation, all those things you do. What I remember, I never knew I could have a deeper experience through those moments along the path when I was practicing that faith. I was so worried about the outer form. What does it look like? Am I doing this right? That there was a deeper experience. And that's what Yogananda is just saying. The great ones, the great masters, they come back to remind us of that. There's a deeper experience we can have in every moment. And here we are reminded that underneath all of that, it's about divine love. It's not about perfecting. Again, we talked yesterday in our class. We're learning the science of the energization exercises. We're learning them to the best of our ability. But they're a devotional exercise. They're to bring us to the point where we're free, and we can feel his presence. We can feel his love. A great master once said, if we only knew how much God loved us. God loves us just the way we are. We just need to come forward, open our hearts, feel for that love, do our techniques the best we can. Remember that he's there with us. It's about the love. It's about what's in our hearts. Yogananda said, when I'm gone, only love can take my place. Not doing this correctly or that doing correctly. If you had read so many books, there was no little fine print anywhere that you could find. Only love can take my place. And so we're blessed to be reminded of this at this time, so we can remember that, to take that forward in everything that we do. Feeling for that love, knowing we're deeply loved. If we only knew, and then if we only lived like that. What is the point of yoga? To be open and free in every moment. To live big, to live with joy, to live with kindness, to live with all those qualities that the masters come and they shower upon us, especially here in Portland, the way it rains. And it's so wonderful to be back. Feels like we haven't been here in a while, and we haven't. We all missed last Sunday, but to remember that they're showering upon us their blessings, their love. So since we both weren't here last week, Daiva will also be sharing, but God bless you all.
Good morning, everyone. Gangamata spoke to the fulfillment of life, the law, in love. And she spoke a lot to the need to go deep into stillness, to make contact with Spirit directly. The Bible just says so simply, be still and know. Be still and know. The greatest moments of fulfillment in everybody's life is always answered in stillness. It's always a moment. It's a hush. It's a pause. It's the sunset takes your breath away. The love of a friend or an intimate leaves you breathless, leaves you feeling contented. Yoga brings you into the state of inner peace. If we could stay in that state all the time, we'd have everything we wanted. But most of us have habituated ourselves to thinking that happiness comes from conditions out there. And so we have that moment of communion, that moment of connection with Spirit, and we drink it in and we're so deeply satisfied. And then we go, oh yeah, this other thing. And I've told this story several times. It's a vivid story. A friend of ours, she was a deep yogi, somebody who practiced going into the stillness on a regular basis deeply with great techniques, but also with great enthusiasm, really reaching for God's love and to commune with Spirit. She was also the spiritual director here for a number of years. And she had the karma to have, for her body to have cancer. And she, when it came, she had it once, managed to get rid of it, went into remission, and it came back. And she was given the option she could have surgery, radiation, and chemo. And she talked with Swami Kriyananda as her spiritual advisor, and she just said to him, sir, unless you tell me that I'm missing something that I should really be paying attention to, I'm probably going to try the natural processes of trying to get whole again, trying to work this karma through my system, but I'm just not a chemo kind of girl. And he listened inside, and he felt for her own particular pathway of growth, what was hers to learn, and he didn't argue with her. He's other people, he said, you should hang on to your body as long as you possibly can, and if it takes chemo and stuff, as long as you can do Kriya, as long as you can be reaching, because think about what it takes to actually incarnate in bodies on this planet, and the amnesia that comes when you land here. I mean, I don't know about how many of you are deeply on this path or seeking God through these teachings. Many of you are looking deeply also for some way of connecting with wholeness. Think how long it's been and how long it takes once you land on this planet to find something that can guide you into deeper wholeness. It's hard to find. And I remember for myself this long yearning of, God, there must be something that brings sanity to this world and the experiences that are here. And when I found the autobiography of a yogi and this path, I finally realized that I'd found for me something that could guide me. Well, so it's, tossing the body frivolously away is not something we want to do, even though it's, being in this world is not the summum bonum of what we're aspiring to. But for her, he acknowledged that maybe this was her next step. And she went through all the natural, we were good friends, and we actually had served together here, and then I was serving in California, and as the cancer progressed, she left here and her role here and was kind of working with things down there. So she worked for me down there. And so we were good friends, and I just watched what happened. And so she was doing all the natural, drinking the juices and exercising and doing all this stuff. But the cancer continued to claim her, and finally it looked like it was going to do what it indeed finally did, which was take her, separate body and soul. She was in the process of, and what she did, she didn't push it away. It's a remarkable choice we all have. Do we deny the circumstances of our lives? Do we say, oh, not this? I've come to the path. I don't have to work outside now, do I? I don't have to be responsible for myself. I can just be, or I don't really have to go through this physical thing, or I don't have to go through this emotional stress with my wife or my job or my boss or my kids or whatever. But of course we do. Because for every one of us, one of the things we have to understand is there is no moment. There is no moment that does not have and is not imbued with the same light of God as any other. And it can't be an intellectual exercise. It has to be something that we experience. And in fact, if you're sincere as a disciple of truth, as somebody who's really seeking God, you have to celebrate the times God takes you into all the places you don't want to go. You have to. Because if you can find joy there, if you can find love there and freedom there, then you own it. Then it's always yours. And that's the gift that Christ and these masters would give us, is to find that joy that is indelible and the love that's indelible. So anyway, she had practiced this in small moments. So when the challenge of life came, and she realized she was going to be dumping the body. It wasn't going to work much longer. She turned toward it instead of away. She didn't push it away with fear and anxiety. She trusted that God was in this too. And she stayed in the light and in the joy. And at one point, she actually left her body. The spiritual eye, the circle there, that's what people talk about going into the tunnel. That's what they go into. They go through the golden light into the blue field, into the white light at the very center. So she's going into that, and she's feeling this expansion into that light. And then I swear to God, she remembered she had shoes on layaway.
They must have been from Nordstrom's.
They must have been really nice shoes. And she woke up back in her hospital bed. And I tell this story because the desires, the commitments that we have into the I will find happiness when, it's a real thing. And it compels us away from the light of God. That's why the yogis are always talking about get past your desires. Because the desires, every time you start to go into the stillness, it's, oh yeah, but I think happiness is going to come from that pair of shoes. And so we go back into where the shoes are. And it's so myriad. So the masters come, God comes in the form of the masters to take charge of our lives, to help guide us to those places where we have the experiences that we need to break the hypnosis of the desires. What we really want, what you want, is the same thing that I want and she wants. It's the same thing the masters want. It's the same thing that the guy in the gutter drinking wants. It's to feel happiness. That's what we want. And if we feel the happiness, it doesn't matter our condition. Security isn't in the things that we think are going to provide the happiness, because none of them ever do. We only get the happiness or the security from them because we put them there first, and then they're there and we think it's associated. Again, if we have a gift to share this morning, it's about the fact that all we want is that joy and that love. If we're in it, it doesn't matter our conditions, our physical state. It doesn't matter anything like that. But we have to break the hypnosis moment by moment, and God's greatest gift to us is to give us the things that we think we don't want. Often the people who are most spiritually advanced are the ones that are going through the most horrendous conditions, because they're not pushing God away. They're not saying, no, not this, I don't want to go there. They're saying, okay, if this is what it takes. I remember, this is going to be a little bit trivial, but it was vivid. We often tell stories as if they're a long time ago, but they're actually happening right now. I remember I was a builder, and I remember taking on a project that was so enormous, so much greater than anything I had ever done. And I was terrified of it. It was a very expensive home. It was off the grid, so it was a solar home. I'd never done solar in this way before. It was light straw clay, so it was a special kind of building technique. It had timber frame, which was very, very expensive. And this is a timber frame story, because the timber frame, this is in Northern California, it was summer, and the timber frame was these huge logs that had been specially milled and cured, seasoned for years, to get them down to a certain dryness so that they wouldn't expand, so that when you cut the joints, and they wouldn't shrink, when you cut the joints would stay tight. And then they drilled and pegged them, so no metal was involved in this. I mean, it was a remarkable, and it was tall. It was a 2-story building. It was 40 feet wide, 40 feet long, 25 feet tall. And, it was probably $100,000, $150,000 frame. And so I hired the contractors to do it. I worked with them as the general. And they came and we built the foundation. They put up the frame. It was gorgeous. And the wood was so beautiful. It was Douglas fir, and it had been just sanded perfectly and everything rounded over and everything pegged. And they were masters. They were some of the finest craftsmen I've ever seen. And this thing was just there. And it was just glorious. And literally that night, a huge California rainstorm rolled in. And I've got all this wood that's exposed, that's so perfect and been worked with for years to get to this point. And here comes this rain, and it's going to saturate. I wake up literally at 3 o'clock in the morning to the sound of thunder and lightning and this rain just coming down in a deluge. It sounded like, the 40 days and 40 nights of rain were here. And I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do? And it's just a sick feeling of all of this effort is now compromised. And I got up, and I'm on the path, okay? So I'm learning to trust God in the midst of things. So I jump into my truck, and it's a 20-minute drive, and I'm driving over there, trying to see through the rain. I get there, and I look at this monster, and I've got my little rain gear on, and I'm just watching it just getting soaked. And I'm imagining in my mind the wood swelling and the joints beginning to splinter and the things swelling and increasing the wood at the joints. So then when the rain goes away, it shrinks and there's gaps and stuff, and the water staining the wood. And I'm walking around this thing, and I'm thinking, where can I get tarps? How can I tie this thing down? The thing's enormous. I felt like a mosquito circling an elephant. And just this growing sense of prayer, but not prayer in the sense of, Lord, fix this, but what's trying to happen here? How can I cooperate? What's going on? What can I do to make a positive effect in this? And I finally, after about an hour and a half of walking around in the rain and trying to figure out anything I could do, I just slunk back to my truck. And I realized I couldn't even call and get a hold of the timber framer at this point. So I'm in there, I'm just watching it rain, and the sun comes up, and the gray, it turns from black to gray. And I finally get a hold of him about 8 o'clock in the morning, so 5 hours of this. And I said, I'm a little concerned about the frame and the storm and stuff. And he says, oh yeah, if it did this for maybe 6 weeks or something, we'd have a real problem. How many times do we do that? How many times do we do exactly that? I'm now, it's 15 years later, 12 years later, and I'm taking on even bigger projects. That was a $150,000 exposure. We have, because what I learned is God cares for us. That's just an example of a million times I've had this test, and it has to prove itself in the cold light of day. It can't be an ivory tower experience, and it can't be a theoretical thing. You have to know God loves you and is taking care of things all along the way. So now we've got a several $million project west of town here that I'm responsible for. And a part of it is this enormous building that's not 40 by 40, but is almost 300 by 50 and 3 floors. And we're putting in new windows, and we ran out of money back before the windows were completed. The windows are in, but there's some rain exposure on it. And we just ran out of money. I couldn't keep going. I couldn't seal the building up like it needs for this winter. And of course, what have we had? The driest winter we've ever had. So I'm going, we're through January, and I'm aware that, the crops are suffering, everybody else is suffering. And I'm thinking, well, we're doing okay here. And then what happened in the last 48 hours or 72 hours, right? Not just good, heavy, good old-fashioned rain, but driving winds and real saturation, yeah. And so I'm lying there thinking, well, they just don't make tarps big enough. And I'm late to the table. And did I do everything that I could? Did I do everything that I could? Have I been culpable in negligence? Because a part of what God would also have us do is realize that we are channels for His light. And our cooperation with things makes the difference, often. But when we've done everything we can, there's nothing left but His grace. And whatever happens is going to be, if I stay in self-offering, and the experience that I have is, if I stay in self-offering, if it ends up damaging the building, it's His dream. It's what He wanted in the first place. The number of times where it's gone south and not been okay in my life. Picking up rattlesnakes, have also proved to be the very things that have brought the grace that I needed to be able to stand firmly and unshaken in the knowledge that every single moment, if we are in tune and receptive and open, is filled with His grace, is filled with His light. And often the greatest tragedies become the greatest stories and the greatest moments of blessing and grace. And for us to open our hearts step by step, piece by piece, that's what the Masters bring. That's why Swami Kriyananda incarnated into this world, is to give us the guidance and support and to help us to find the courage to discover for ourselves that God's love is real. And that the security we want isn't found in outer things that always change, but in the power of His presence inside under every circumstance. That's the gift He would give. Even Masters when they incarnate, even God when He incarnates, is not free from the delusion and the influence of how creation is made. Look at the life of Christ. Look at His last moments on this planet. It just didn't look that good from a human standpoint, and He didn't push it away. He said, Lord, this doesn't look like a really good idea from where I sit. Right? It's an honest prayer. It doesn't look that good. It doesn't look that good having this rainstorm come with this exposure. But if it's what you need, then okay. And even on the cross, even under the worst human conditions, when it looks like nothing's going to work, and it's all over, He says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. His care is there. And then 3 days later, He's just up walking around. He said, even death you overcome. This isn't metaphorical, although it's also metaphorical. It isn't only. Death is the last thing we conquer. Even that doesn't have power over us when we turn to the light, because it's just another surface change. And who we are isn't our bodies and isn't our circumstances. So Yogananda had a particularly trying time. In fact, I don't know if this is the test, but he was bringing light, the light of yoga, to the West. Nobody had ever done that in this way back in the 1920s. And then in the 30s, 29, the stock market crash, it affected his work also and his sharing of the light. He says at one point he was terribly embarrassed financially. It was hard. But this is a prayer that came from his heart, received after a great test of God. In disease or in health, in success or in failure, in poverty or prosperity, in joy or in sorrow, in disaster or in safety, in life or in death, I stand immutably, unalterably, unshakably loyal, devoted, and firmly loving Thee, my Heavenly Father, forever, forever, forever. Let's take a moment of silence.